Hello, members. Welcome and good evening. Thank you for those who are joining us on a very balmy evening in the UK tonight. I'm sure there's lots of you as well going to watch on YouTube afterwards, as I've heard there's quite a few barbecues happening. So I don't blame you, but I have to say, having had a little pre-taste of one of this evening's wines, the alborino, it's perfect for this weather. So if you are joining us live from your gardens, from your living rooms, wherever it may be, I can't think of a better wine to kick off this evening's event with. A small bit of housekeeping before we begin. I'm Anna Spooner, for anyone who doesn't know, part of the Tastings and Events team at the Wine Society, and I'm joined behind the scenes tonight by Mahesh. Mahesh is titled Tastings Team, so if you do need to speak to Mahesh tonight, but for any technical issues, etc., please do hit Tastings Team in your message and you should be able to send him a note. If the chat isn't working, please do let us know. We had a couple of problems last week and we can rectify them, but fingers crossed the chat does work. If it's not, pop a question in the Q&A and we'll fix it for you. On that note, you can use the chat when it's working to let us know where you are and what you're drinking, and importantly, use the Q&A button to submit questions. There will be time for Gordon and Bevan to answer some questions later. I'm about to introduce, it looks like the chat's working, fantastic, thank you. So just before we kick off, I wanted to say a huge heartfelt thanks. It's a sort of holiday time for Gordon and Bevan, and it's also a busy time for Jo. So a huge thank you for you all three for joining us. Also, just to say that we are very fortunate because we don't have one wine champ tonight, not two wine champs, but three champions. So I hope that you've bought a bottle. If you haven't, there will be links once you've heard about the wines on where to buy them, and we will pop up some information as well. So before I hand over to Jo, I just wanted to say how lucky I am that the Newton Johnson wines were champions. It's a place I visited, luckily enough, with Jo 4 or 5 years ago and had the most fantastic tasting, and it holds a really, really special place in my heart. So as soon as I knew there were three champs under your stable, there was nobody else I wanted to ask more. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to hand over to Jo Locke, and I hope you all have a good evening. So cheers.
Thank you very much, Anna, and welcome, Gordon and Bevan. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I know you've had a mad scramble with collecting kids and getting organised, but it's just so good of you to be with us this evening. And we're really looking forward to hearing more. And I hope that you're going to be able to give a flavour of the beautiful place where you are, which both Anna and I have been lucky enough to visit. It was the most glorious day when Anna and I met there with you guys a few years ago, with the most spectacular views. And I often find I write about these things, but it's very hard to get some of that across. You know, I keep saying to people, you're going to have to go for yourself. They really must go for themselves. Anyway, I'm sure you're going to give us a flavour of that. You saw my big smile just now. Nobody could have been more thrilled than me when 3 of your wines came through in our Wine Champs blind tastings this year. When the first one came through, I was chuffed to bits. But for then there to be 2 more was just extraordinary. You know, it really was fantastic. So congratulations. My colleagues are not an easy tasting panel to get past. And we're all a bit competitive over it. So it's always great to see one's own wines coming through. I have to say some Spanish alborino came through this year, but no Portuguese, which is also my patch. So you bumped Portugal out of a winning spot as well. Anyway, lovely to see you both. I should say that, of course, I first, in a former life, I first knew your dad and worked with your dad many, many years ago. And you two have taken over. So I hope you'll also tell us a bit about the history of the family in Hemel-en-Aarde, and, you know, was it a given that you two were going to get involved? Anyhow, I'm going to hand over to you to tell us all about Newton Johnson.
Evening, Jo. Hi, Anna. Yeah, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. I think quite a contrast to your day in the UK. It's quite chilly in the middle of winter here, but we're grateful for it. It's what we need. And I think hopefully through the conversation tonight, we'll give you the balmier notes a little bit later. But yeah, it's lovely to be here with you. And I hate to say it, but I think we were surprised as anyone to see 3 of our wines come through in the wine championships. You know, it's lovely to see, especially blind. It's nice to be put in a lineup that is very wide, is very competitive, is very quality driven, and then to be judged by such well-rounded palates and well-founded palates. So no, we're very, very chuffed. And I mean, it's lovely to see something that we'll get onto a bit later, like the alborino come through. But yeah, I mean, to myself and Gordy, no, I don't think either of us imagined to be in the wine industry. Not at all. Neither of us studied it. Neither of us, I think, at university drank wine. Yeah, we had lots of it at home available to us, and we grew up in it. And I think it was always actually something that was surreptitiously there that we were aware of but hadn't really recognized. So I think growing up in Stellenbosch in the 80s and into the 90s, it was a very small industry, a very, very intimate industry. So my dad had a wonderful black book of the industry of people like Neil Ellis, Giles Webb, Kevin Arnold, Jan Boland Coetzee, Etienne Leriche, many, Ross Gower, Klein Constantia. So we were lucky enough to enjoy social time with these people around the industry, but we were never ourselves visioned as producers or winemakers or even wine farmers. And slowly it grew upon us. Gordy was made an invitation a year before me, so he was the chosen son as far as that was concerned. And then a year later, I thought it was going to be one summer of helping the family out, and then I was going to be on my merry way again. And 25 years now, today, we've all been working together, as a family, good times or not, Gordy was trying to shove me out of the picture earlier. Yeah, so we're very grateful, very fortunate, and very, very happy, especially when we get to see what's happened with 3 of our wines tonight.
Now you can hear me.
There we go.
It's really interesting to hear that actually it wasn't necessarily planned. I don't know, maybe your dad had it in the back of his mind. He just hadn't shared it with you. Perhaps he just felt it was important for you to reach that decision on your own, because, I guess that works. You can't really force a young person in any one direction, can you? You're going to know that with your own kids. But anyhow, you're both there now, which is fantastic. And actually, it's not just you two, of course, because, Gordy, you're a husband and wife team as well. So there are 3 family members that are behind the Newton Johnston brand.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, I met Nadia, my wife, when she was doing an internship here in the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley back in 2004. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was love at first sight. And she first worked a couple of years in Constantia before actually joining us out here in the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley. And yeah, we've got a great working relationship. Not many people can believe it, but we've got a great working relationship when it comes to wine and working with the wines, and a great how can I say, rapport, or I don't know, we just click when we work with the wines together. So it's been an awesome time.
Yeah. And more importantly, Nadia is the only qualified winemaker in the family.
That's true.
Okay. So we should be extremely pleased that she's involved.
Yeah, I took a bit more. I was a bit more in the artistic direction. I actually studied a business degree, but art had always been my passion. And yeah, as soon as I worked my first harvest in Stellenbosch in 1996 now, with a good Aussie, Ben Radford, who you might know. I had a great time with him, and it was really the bug bit me, and I just wanted to know more. And that's what got me into winemaking.
Fantastic. Yeah. Good stuff. Okay, well, Give us a bit more background to the. So how did your parents just fall in love with that part of South Africa? How did you end up in Hemel-en-Aarde?
Well, I think my father at the time, he was doing more negociant wine. So he was sourcing a lot of wines from throughout the Western Cape and, working as a one-man show, exporting wines mostly to the UK. And he was, after a few years doing this on his own, he was looking for a home to really just simply bottle the wines and just expedite the way he was processing them. So that's when I joined him. And as I joined him, I just kind of finished my internship with Ben. And I was feeling itchy to try, get in some grapes into the winery and try a few things out. So, there was no real vision in the beginning. It all kind of just grew organically. So, in the beginning, we were making all kinds of different wines. We were obviously making a Sauvignon, but there were Cabernet Merlot blends. There was some Pinotage in the mix. So we were trying a lot of different things, still finding our feet. I was still trying to find my confidence with winemaking. And as it happened, with my father choosing this place in the Hemel-en-Aarde, we bought a piece of land off Bouchard-Finlayson originally. And it's, the original farm was very small. We built a cellar. We only had about 3 hectares of vineyard, which was not an ideal soil for the Hemel-en-Aarde, very sandy soil that we grew some Sauvignon Blanc. But we always knew, obviously with Hamilton Russell and Bouchard-Finlayson, through their history of Pinot Noir being a very important grape and Chardonnay being a very important grape for the valley. And we started to source some grapes within the valley from old BK5 cloned vineyards. And I think we made our first Pinot in 98 or 99.
It was a blend of 2 vintages.
Yeah, Vermeillesine. We made a Pinot, and neither vintages 98 or 99 were that good, so we blended them together. And that's how we started with Pinot. And we planted a bit of Pinot on that small farm in the beginning, but it wasn't great soil. It was really a site that was best for vegetables, very alluvial soil, no real clay. So, we started with Pinot, not really knowing where to get the best out of it. And having to piece things together and buy little bits here and there until we got the real chance to buy the farm, which is where we are now in 1999, 2000, and started planting our first vineyards there in 2002. And that to me was the real leap forward, the real understanding. Once we started farming those vineyards ourselves and discovering what was coming from them, that's when the whole learning process really started. There you can see that's Sea Vineyard, so that's right in front of the winery, looking out onto the Atlantic where the sun is setting. That looks to be about late harvest, I think, if I can see where the sun is. So it looks to be about a March sunset, post-harvest.
I think if I could just chip in here for a moment as well. I think the more romantic side of it, beyond the practicality that Gordy's just mentioned, is, in the mid-80s to late 80s in this country, we started the Cape Wine Masters, which I always sort of say is a long-lost cousin of the Master of Wine. And my dad was the second graduation of that, but he was the first Cape Wine Master to do his thesis on Pinot Noir. So there was sort of something stuck in the back of his mind of looking to Pinot Noir. Wasn't specifically focused like it is today in the Hemel-en-Aarde, although Bouchard and Hamilton were both working with it. But I think thankfully back in the 90s, this was soil that we could at least afford. And it was both the properties that we've developed were bush before the time. One was a derelict protea farm. The other one was just a blue gum forest. So we were fortunate that we could afford to buy them, come in, break some virgin soil, blank canvas, and similar to what Gordy said, is actually start off from complete scratch. First time farmers, first time the properties were being farmed. But thankfully, the vision was there. I think the hunger was definitely there from Gordy's side, the keenness, and we are very, very grateful. I kind of sometimes say that Hemel-en-Aarde was a dartboard and kind of blindfolded me through a dart. And I don't think we actually realize how close we feel we got to the bullseye. Every year, we realize we got closer and closer to the bullseye, completely unbeknownst to us in the beginning.
And has that farm delivered to you the vineyard that you need since, or have you expanded since that time?
We've expanded slightly. I mean, where we are right now at Bevan's house, I just live further up the hill. It's actually slightly removed from the Newton Johnson farm. So if you are at the farm, we're on the north face where we receive the most sun here in the southern hemisphere. So if you look directly across the valley to the southern slope is where we have another farm called Sanford. Where you'll be tasting some of the Chardonnay. We have our Sanford Vineyard, which makes up a large part of the family vineyards wine. So that was a bit of expansion, but as I said, it's in the beginning we had no idea what to expect from our vineyards, and the last 20 years have just been 2 decades of discovery, discovering what Pinot does on the different types of soil on the farm, the different types of clay we have on the farm, and the different nuances between the vineyards. If anyone knows our wines, we've got 2 single vineyards called Sea Dragon and Wind and Sea, and they're vastly different in the glass, but they literally a stone's throw away from each other. And I don't like to reference Burgundy as what we're trying to do. We are ourselves, but I see Burgundy in a way that it's all about observation. It's about really learning from your surroundings, learning from the previous generations before you of what's going on in that piece of soil. So for us, I think we're kind of that first generation to really take it in. Hopefully there's another generation that wants to play this game and have some fun with it. But I think that's really the thing that keeps me in winemaking is just that it's never ending. You're always learning, and you're always trying to improve and adapt to your surroundings.
And again, to just come in there, to answer your question, I mean, we started making some Pinots bought in grapes from Shannon in Elgin from about 2002, 2003. And 2008 was the first Pinot from our own property. And it was lucky enough it became Gordy's first ever 5 stars with the Platter Guide here locally. But locally with our maiden vintage, a lot of people are like, we liked some of the wines before, but this is the way that we know that now you guys are doing it correctly. And it's like, well, we've just taken 2 vineyards, one in Elgin, one in Hemel-en-Aarde. We're making both the wines exactly the same way. But this is what the Hemel-en-Aarde is giving us for the first time. So it was very much something that started to very, very much feel at home. It was taking some experience that we had learned from bought-in grapes from an appellation next door, and suddenly our farm gave us something that we feel we could slowly exhale. And it's like, wow, this is something that we really are driven by, and this is something we do want to get into. So it's been very, very rewarding to us, extremely so. Far more than I actually think we realize. And kind of where we find ourselves now in 2022 is kind of halfway through the lifetime of our current vineyards. We've learned so much. We've experienced. I mean, tonight we're going to talk about 3 wines that we didn't imagine would do this well. Yet, though, if we kind of just behave ourselves, there's so much more that we can expect from our vineyards as they start to age, and hopefully as Gordy starts to age and as he improves his wisdom.
Excellent. Well, should we start tasting some wine?
Certainly.
So we're going to start off with the youngest. I see there's been a few comments. Thank you very much for all the comments on the alborino. So literally now back to the future. Yeah, our alborino is a very, very young experience for us. It was once again actually a vision planted by my father. We were naturally obviously working with Chardonnay alongside our pinot vineyards. There's a lot of Sauvignon Blanc planted around, so we didn't really have any planted, but we were working with it quite extensively. I think to try and simplify it, the three main vintages you sort of experienced in South Africa is Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin Blanc, beautiful old vineyards, a lot of heritage vineyards to the interior, and then Chardonnay. And in time, as we got to understand our own exact farm and appellation up in Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, with our quite rare soils being granitic, decomposed granite, the question started coming up, what white could we potentially? Pinot, for us, showed perfectly there. It very much gave us a home. Chardonnay as well, which we'll get into later. But we wanted to find a more specific sort of marriage between our maritime climate and our granite soils. And my father mentioned alborino. I needed to go and Google it because I didn't know what that meant. And we need to go, but obviously it was the inspiration once again out of Europe and out of Galicia, maritime climate, granite soils right up against the sea. So we took a chance and brought some material in from California in 2010, 11.
Well, the whole process started 2008, but yeah, by the time we got it in, we could get our material in 2010, and it was actually 2012 we had this tiny bit of wine just to play around with. 8 liters.
8 liters. And so 2014 was our first official vintage of alborino, and it was the first alborino made in the country. And kind of similar, it's a lovely example to refer to, which we'll see with the other wines, is there was no local comparison. And so for us, obviously tasting fairly broadly, looking at some examples from New Zealand and from Australia, but the style and expression that we were inspired by and looked at in the wine was naturally from Spain. And so it became very much the sort of inspiration in trying to form our own signature with it. So it's still a very young experience, but it does, I think, provide a sort of a condensed look at what we've been doing with the other vineyards and the other wines as well, where the inspirations, as Gordy says, being able to observe, be able to steal with our eyes and ears, and try and formulate our own philosophy. So the alborino, in contrast to the other wines, has been fun. There hasn't been any other local comparatives up until 2018. We enjoyed trying the wines, drinking the wines, getting to know the wines. One thing we were looking at of this variety specifically was texture. You know, it's got its characteristic aromatic fruit. We were a little bit nervous, does it retain its acidity? It's almost provided us with a challenge contrary to all the other varieties. It retains its acidity incredibly well. So that's almost been the curveball that's been thrown at Gordy. But we were wanting to see something similar to Chardonnay, but with more upfront fruit, and really to have something that came in with sort of great upfront flavors, but really carry itself through the mid palates. And alborino has been rewarding. It's been rewarding growing it. It's been rewarding working with it in the vineyard. Not that I would know, I'm being white hands, but it has given us good crops. It is really, and we started planting it in our very warm drought years, and knowing that we were far warmer and drier than Galicia. And so it has just completely sort of surpassed a lot of our expectations. Once again, even in the bottle. Not nice to sort of knock off some of our Portuguese, but hey, it's a tasting. So we.
And I think it's, you know, so this is, we're tasting the 2020. You're probably already selling 2022. I wouldn't be surprised. Certainly 2021. But this is the 2020, and it still has such lovely freshness. And I know that the Portuguese producers that I talk to talk about, actually, it's a grape that really benefits from having a good year in bottle. You know, they say it starts to show at its best once it's had about a year in bottle. So, you know, and with that acidity, you know, it's going to hold that freshness, keep that freshness. So you're exactly right. You've got lovely textural wine, but with real freshness as well. So I think it's looking really great.
No, it's a very resilient variety. I mean, we didn't have any idea that it was going to retain so much acidity. As Bevan said, as we started planting our vineyards, we were going into a dry period in the Cape. And the whole reason why we chose this variety was because of, through the research that we did and looking into what Galicia was doing and looking at its maritime climate and its granite soils, thinking it was going to do well. But we never expected it to retain such good acidity. And it is also no surprise that it's also been, accepted as a Bordelais white variety now as well. And you can probably see it. That's the exact reason why it's there, is for the acidity. And that's why I think it just retains its freshness so well, ages so well. And one of the other things I like about it is, I always seem to think that it has this bit of a connection with Riesling as well, that it can get its bit of complexity on its own. It doesn't need oak. In fact, we've tried it with some oak and it just doesn't mix well. It's one of those grapes, and as a Chardonnay producer, I'm very jealous that it can get all its complexity without the introduction of oak. And then again, just such great texture. You compare it to another fresh white grape like Sauvignon Blanc, and for me, alborino just it has far superior texture to it.
And you guys have, out in South Africa, you have such wonderful fish, many of which we don't have here in Europe. Of course, it's in Europe. This is a grape that goes with fish, but it must do that so well down with what you have down in South Africa too.
I mean, that's where the discussion started, because the whole discussion started with my father of, we were drinking Sauvignon Blanc and he was going, geez, we've got a great Portuguese community in South Africa for a long time. So we get lots of cheap Vinho Verde around, and, you head up to the coast, or you head up the East Coast, going to Mozambique and to, more tropical climates, and you drink these cheap Vinho Verdes and they're wonderful. You have them with prawns, you have them with the fish over there, and especially for us as a family, we've got very much a culture of being near the sea, of loving the seawater. Okay, there we go. But yeah, and we love to cook as well. So it was really talking about how we live our lives, how we eat seafood, and what kind of wine is going to go best with it, and what fits with our surroundings.
Yeah,
it has. It's been it's been a lot of fun, and again very rewarding, because on the other side of it, introducing it into this country, like myself, the majority, 99.9% of the drinkers here had never heard of alborino. So when bringing it to the market, everything Corey's speaking about, what we did within the vineyards and even in the cellar, was all on the production side. But now we've got some wine. We thought it was pretty fun. We were quite happy with it. But what do we do with it now? And you've got to start introducing it to people. And majority of the people here locally had never heard of it. So you kind of introduce it on the lines of between a Sauvignon Blanc and a Chardonnay. It carries its texture well, but it's got the freshness and upfront flavors similar to, and everyone reacted very positively. They're like, wow. And beyond just the novelty factor of it, beyond, okay, it's something new. But it does. And thankfully, it does go very well with food. And that opened up a lot of sort of interest within the wine. And where it's done particularly well in the last few years is actually within Cape Town on menus. It did very well where people said, cheapest, we're going to try that. We hear this wine is going to be partnered with the seafood, so let's go for it. And then, similar to yourself, when you come and visit, I didn't know what to expect from any of our overseas buyers and things like that. But thankfully, once again, now we export more of this wine than we sell locally. So again, it's been very rewarding, far more so than what we expected.
To the extent that you've planted more, haven't you?
No, we have planted more, and we've been changing a little bit the way we work with it in the vineyards. We've since been taking on a pruning master who I'm lucky to work with last year with Sea Vineyard in Search. It's an Italian company that really works on trying to get the best out of your vines in the way that you prune them. And I didn't have a lot of experience with actually working in the vineyard with alborino, much more than the years that I have done. And it was great working with this consultant that he had his colleagues in Galicia, and just seeing what is the best for the vine. We've since changed it more to Guyot training as well, going from cordon. So, and I think as with all the varieties that we work with, I think we try to put it into its own box and just find out which is the best way to treat it and manage it.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, it's delicious. Congratulations. Well, we ought to move on to the Chardonnay. I think your one of your great specialities.
A lot trickier than alborino. Yeah, I mean, when we bought the land and then the vision of getting into the vineyards, and I think as Gordy described earlier, from the 90s into the early 2000s, within my father's company, us joining him, the slow transition and into the vision was moving from this out-and-out negotiation company into making wines, buying grapes, so also a layer of negotiation there, to now virtually becoming a standalone wine estate. And the vision moving to the Hemel-en-Aarde from Stellenbosch was behind Pinot Noir, but always was naturally partnered with Chardonnay. And I think the first 10 years, especially the trickiness of Pinot in the vineyards, Gordy felt that a lot of his attention and demands had been made by Pinot. But it was truly, I think, from about 2017, maybe a bit of 15 as well, where it felt like there's been so much attention given to Pinot that, we've always loved it and enjoyed the Chardonnays. They have in their ways also showed a lot earlier, as they do from the vineyards than, say, Pinot do. But now, I mean, the last 5 years has been exceptional for, I think, what we've been seeing and discovering and showing in the Chardonnays. And that's very much capped off in these last few vintages by 2020, 21 still coming. We, again, within 17, where there was slight sort of adjustments and little kinks made in the winemaking, we were still very much in the firm hold of those warm, dry vineyards. Anything got too hot, you could just feel a lot of good work being burnt off a little bit. But from 19 onwards, get into these cooler, fresher vintages, and really just how the composure, the energy of the wines were just so much more inherent there, and not needed to sort of be found by man, but just wanting to be shown. And thankfully, I think that showed a little bit in Gordy's winemaking as well, kind of stripping back the layers, especially from 17. I mean, these wines have now from 17 become unfiltered, unfined. So literally compared to 15 years ago when we started a Chardonnay, the only addition made to this wine now is a bit of sulfur. And everything else has been done, on its own speed and on its own goodness. So yeah, it's been really rewarding, especially again in a wine champion like Chardonnay. It's one thing talking about alborino. It's a very small pond within the wine world. It's a very exciting one. It's a very rewarding one in warmer weather. But if we really want to be able to see how we're faring within the big world of wine, there's no better white variety than Chardonnay to show you whether you are forging ahead or not. So it was an exceptional accolade to get to see the wine champion come through for the Chardonnay.
Yeah, I think with the Chardonnay, we've been blessed with a couple of great vintages in 2019 and 2020, which after the drought years were much more longer ripening, much better acidity levels. There was even quite a difference in the way the Pinot and the Chardonnay ripened. The Chardonnay was up to a week to 2 weeks later than the Pinot, which is quite abnormal. So I think for me, it was a first in a way to really see Chardonnay pick up a lot of complexity just by having that long hang time while still retaining the acidity. And it's one of the, I think, the great characters of this area is that there's Chardonnay here can give energy. I don't like Chardonnay to be too textural or too fat or too sweet. It must give you energy. It must make you feel alive and give you some chutzpah. And I think what Bevan alluded to with, previous vintages and where we started working on the wine was really trying to make much more of the juice and the grape itself. I think in early, say 10, 15 years ago, we were perhaps overworking the wine, perhaps being a bit too new worldy in our approach. And, we started to then play around with, dropping away from a lot of the additions that we were doing, using enzymes to clean the juice and get it ultra clear, and started to judge the quality of the juice itself straight out of the press without settling it. It actually the idea started coming from an intern I had who worked at DLC. And I just said, well, what do you guys do with the Montrachet? You only have 200 cases. And I said, well, there's no debouchage at all. We press it and it all goes straight into the barrel. So that's been a lot of the journey over the last 4 or 5 years for us. It's just been seeing the effects of the quality of juice that we can put into the barrel, how it affects the texture. And another aim for us was I think by doing that, you're also extending the life of the wine. We would often see some Chardonnays at 6, 7 years old, just all of a sudden turn a bit nutty and a bit honeyed, and a bit too developed, almost like what we saw in the early noughties with Burgundy with Premox. So that was also one of our goals as well, is that we want to see our Chardonnays after 10 years still with some vibrancy and some energy. So that was another goal of ours, and it wasn't. I think it was unintended, but I think I've now fallen in love with the texture that this kind of treatment can do for the wine as well. It just gives the wine a third dimension, and coming with that, which you will probably always get with our pinots, is the little bit of reduction, which is a fermentation character. But for me, it almost enhances the salinity of the wine. It detracts from flavors that are too sweet. And for me, sweetness and fruit flavors kind of detracts from the whole wine, or kind of covers a lot of other interesting characters that I think are there, some very fine nuances of characters. And by doing that, I think you get to experience a lot more of the wine, a lot more excitement out of it.
Certainly for me, there's a lovely balance in this wine between the texture on the palate. It's not broad, but it's got mouth-filling texture, a lovely kind of silky feel to it. But yeah, that word energy that you used, I get that. To me, it's almost a prickle on the end of your tongue, just not quite. But yeah, there is that energy and a salinity, which to me really helps lift the wine. And I love that. I'm not a big fan of the very reductive Chardonnays. Quite often when we're doing the blind tastings, for example, I can be a bit, I don't tend to vote for the very reductive examples because they really don't please me. But if you've got just that hint of it, which actually now, when I first tasted the wine, it was there, but it wasn't troubling. Actually now I'm not really getting that at all. But if I am, it's more on the palate and the impact that has in terms of the mouthfeel, if you like. So yeah, I think the balance is really, really super. And the family vineyard Chardonnay, you produce more than one Chardonnay. So tell us about the family vineyards, this particular wine.
So this particular wine is 3 different vineyards. The biggest contingent of it is Sanford, which is the farm that we are on now. We haven't as yet made it a single vineyard, and I always find this with Chardonnay is that I think it's very easy to make a good Chardonnay, but it's very, very difficult to make a great Chardonnay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing, I think, with looking at different sites of Chardonnay. They all tend to taste pretty similar in a way, and it takes a really special site to speak to you. It's not like Pinot in a way. Pinot can tell you where it's been planted, and if it's horrible, it's a horrible wine. If it's great, it's a fantastic wine. Chardonnay will always perform relatively well in all kinds of different circumstances, but if you get something great, it really stands out. So our Stanford Vineyard, which is where we are on currently, that to me is a funny wine because, again, it has a lot of richness up front, but then it finishes with acidity and it finishes with energy, and it's salivating. It kind of wants to, you want the next sip, and it's the one thing that I love about that vineyard. It delivers a lot of complexity. And the 2 other vineyards that we have on the Newton Johnson side, on the warmer slope side, tend to give you, well, there's one vineyard which again is pretty similar to Sanford in a way, just not as good, not as textural. But the northern side tends to give you those slight kind of spicy nuances, almost like baking spice, not too warm. And we try to complement that then obviously with our wood regime and how we oak the wine as well.
Yeah, so the family vineyards is a combination of the most predominant Chardonnay vineyards on our property, because we buy a bit of Chardonnay from next door, which goes into South End Chardonnay.
Mm-hmm.
So it is an estate example of our property and of our Chardonnay. And Gordy is slowly tinkering with thinking that potentially one of the vineyards must come out and show itself as a single vineyard. But this is very much indicative of who we are, where we are, and our appellation, very much so.
And what sort of age are these vineyards, just out of interest?
Well, the oldest now is just touching on 20 years. Stanford Vineyard itself is only 13 years old. So, we're still looking at the teens and slowly seeing these vineyards build up, a lot more integrity over time. And that for us, with Pinot as well, is the great unknown, is what can 30, 40-year-old vineyards, Pinot Noir vineyards, Chardonnay vineyards in this area, what can they really achieve, or healthy vineyards without leaf roll virus, that kind of thing. And that's our long-term goal, is to plant vineyards to get to that age and really see where, how high can we go, where's it going to take us?
Yeah. I should apologize to those who've joined us this evening that we've talked a lot about Pinot Noir, but we aren't actually tasting a Pinot Noir this evening. So apologies for that. The family vineyards Pinot we're releasing in the autumn, I believe, from memory. We probably ought to move on to the red wine, however, the red wine that we do have.
Just before we do, Jo, I hope you wouldn't mind. I thought I might ask if we've had a couple of questions on the white. So before we go into the red, if it would be all right to ask those, that would be great. I'll probably start back at the beginning. We've got 3 alborino questions and a Chardonnay one. Of course, we should have a few minutes at the end to mop up other bits. But we've had a question from Mark Temple, who's asked, who are your favourite alborino or alvarino producers from Iberia, Galicia and Portugal?
I would say, is it Zarate? I actually met the guy, or corresponded a bit with him through Jamie Good. Now I've gone a blank and I've lost the name of the guy, but Zarate, and he does his own his own alborino under his own name as well. And his grandfather was also very influential in really establishing Galicia as an alborino area. But yeah, love his wines. He also mixes it up a little bit with a bit of wood with chestnut, which is very interesting. A little bit older chestnut wood, which apparently goes well with alborino. So that's another future little project to concentrate on.
Thank you. A couple more. We've got James has asked why alborino, well, sorry, James, I'm paraphrasing, but why alborino and not Riesling? Was there a reason that you didn't feel like the conditions were right for Riesling, or was it that Riesling was too widespread already in South Africa?
Yeah, if I can come in there again, going back to where we started, Riesling is for us not established enough in maritime climate. So, I mean, it's obviously grown widely and with a various array of soils and stuff like that. But particularly, for us, I mean, we are only sort of 3 miles from the ocean with the start of our vineyards. And so we were very much driven, number one, by our climate, maritime, and then try to put the, and so that's where alborino became more pertinent to us than, say, Riesling. And again, then within the winemaking, when we really not disregarding some beautiful textures in Riesling, but we wanted quite a prominent texture, to come across in that fruit. So, and, as much as we have planted it and started working with it in our warmer years, I think we'd have a bit more confidence for what we understood for alborino, whereas Riesling, there are about 2 or 3 producers in this country that I enjoy drinking, but it just hasn't quite shown itself. And it kind of felt that it was a question with a question mark, dare I say it, still. Whereas alborino was a blank canvas and something that we could have a go at. And again, it's not about just, I sometimes get frustrated in the wine industry about we're a young region, we're a new producer, but somewhere along the line, we have to become 40, 50 years old, not ours, but our vineyards, hopefully. We're 40, 50. Okay, we're 40, 50. So you can't always just have new in the wine industry. You have to start forming your classics. But for us, the inspiration around alborino wasn't just the novelty of it, but more about how we felt that combination between our climate and our soils.
Yeah. Fabulous, thank you. And then one quick last one on alborino, which was just around that you mentioned it had come from California, and Andrew asked why California.
That's a very good question, because it went controversial. It went all around the world. We first started with the Spanish to see if we could get some material there, and the Spanish told us that, sorry, but it's all being lapped up by the Americans. And then we actually got a contact with Yolanda in Oz to bring it in, and we got the project underway. Everything was great. Paid the deposits. Everything was good, and it was just about to come over where they called us up and they said, sorry, it's not alborino, it's Sauvignon Blanc. And that was the big, well, call it scandal in Oz a few years ago, where it was discovered not to be alborino. And then we went to UC Davis, the university in Sacramento, and got some help through them there. And it's a lot to do as well with the different institutions that work with each other internationally. That our quarantine, our red tape and quarantine system would. They've accepted a lot of stuff through UC Davis in the past, going all the way back to the 70s. So it was a lot easier process to do it that way.
Yeah, in hindsight, I think actually if we had tried to pursue the Spanish, they said, listen, we go and buy material from the local co-op up the road. I think if we had started there and tried to fulfill the paperwork and the procedures in bringing foreign material into this country, we would have been lost. Australia would have helped, except they didn't have the right stuff. So UC Davis was great. They had a clone that they obviously cleaned up and developed, and paperwork was all in order. One institution knew the other institution, so it actually made it all quite easy at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. That was a great answer. My last question, I hope, will be much easier, so you can go on to the reds, which is a huge amount of praise for both wines. But your Chardonnay is being compared to Burgundy, and I hope you don't mind that. And Tim has mentioned, can you give us some aging potential for the Chardonnay?
That's interesting. I'd love to think that this wine is still going to be as fresh 10 years from now. That's our aim, or that's my aim. You know, I don't want to see it go downhill after 6-7 years. And I do think that the way that we've handled it, as to what we would have done previously, say from 2015 backwards, I think it is a lot different than what we've done. And so I think 10 years, we'll hold out for it then. But yeah, I still want to see some energy from this wine in 10 years.
Yeah, it's actually testament to this discussion and tonight's opportunity to talk about the wines. But you know, from 2017 onwards, Gordy had been working with natural ferments for a decade. But then moving away from I always kind of say more and more, we're learning to do less and less. So taking away something like filtering and fining, it allows the wine to show brighter and better in the beginning, but ultimately you're stripping away a layer from that wine and a little bit of that longevity in it too. So that is, I mean, he extended the winemaking by 6 months, gave me a release date in February of the year now to November of the year. Major mayhem in my life, but anyway. But basically, from 17, the wines have started to be focused and developed or made for what they will be down the line. So tonight, to be drinking a 2020 where it's achieved what it did in a blind wine tasting is fantastic. Yeah, we really do appreciate how the wine is being seen now. I think this wine's going to be singing in 2-3 years' time, and we would love to see what it's going to be in 8 to 10 years' time.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much. And I will go off now and I'm going to really enjoy the red wine. So I'm very excited. Thank you.
Yeah, tell us about Full Stop Rock. Somebody asked me the question the other day, where did the name come from? And I'm sure you've told me that before, but I couldn't remember. So I'm hoping you're going to tell us now.
So we're going to say picture is going to be, you know, more than words or louder than words. But essentially, this is an unintended consequence in buying the property. I kind of say when we bought it, it was looking at 1 bottle of Pinot Noir and 1 bottle of Chardonnay, and life is not that simple. So as you know, up at the winery where we are, so I should bring it a little bit closer, is we're 300 meters above sea level. And the vineyards themselves fall down over an elevation of 100 meters to the river. And what we have started to see through the Chardonnays and the Pinots is very different expressions through those nuances of soil. But right at the bottom, we've got this incredibly rocky patch of about 3 hectares right before the river. And so that's, forget the posing winemaker, but you know, we've got the winery up at the back there. So we've actually virtually got 20 hectares of vineyard condensed into one angle. But right at the bottom, these soils are so rocky that firstly, they become too warm with a lot of terrestrial heat to work with Chardonnay and Pinot. So immediately those took that out of the equation. And also Chardonnay and Pinot, as I sort of jokingly say, like tender loving care. And unfortunately, those soils are not tender loving care. So this gave us an opportunity to work with something that enjoyed the heat a bit more and wanted a bit more sort of to counter its figure, put it that way. And so that led us to Syrah. That we're working with single varietals and everything else, we felt that we'd like to go with a little spread of those varieties. So we've got Syrah, Mourvèdre, and Grenache planted there. And as you can see in that photo, it was Gordy who came up with the name though, Full Stop Rock. You know, where every other vineyard, you dig a hole and you plonk a vine in. There was no putting a spade into these soils. It was literally taking a crowbar, having to wedge the rocks apart and then dropping a vine in. So it was counter to everything else we were doing on the farm was the Full Stop Rock vineyard. But it was an unintended consequence. We got 18 hectares or 17 hectares of beautiful vineyards to be able to work with Pinot and Chardonnay, alborino, but this was counter to everything else we were doing on the farm.
Thank you.
And as you know, in this country, we like to braai or light a fire. And so Pinot is not the friendliest with heavily smoked beef, but thankfully this then gave us an opportunity to have a braai wine at home.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's, I mean, this wine actually, when we first started making it, was just Syrah and Mourvedre, say 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, 2005.
Yeah, and I can't, yeah, I'm trying to think of the exact vintage when we started to incorporate Grenache, which at the time was Grenache that we were buying in, but it did a lot for the wine as well. It gave it a great lift. It brought, again, just some light, almost Pinot-like kind of cherry flavors into the wine as well, and just gave it a great deal of brightness as well.
And I have to say, I'm tasting this wine at our sort of chilly tasting room temperature, and it works really well for the wine. I wouldn't want it to be any warmer than that. I'm very glad I'm not sitting at home in our rather hot kitchen. Otherwise, it would have had to have gone in the fridge. You know, our tasting room here is kind of what you might call cellar temperature. So the wine is still cool. So it's lovely and fragrant. I mean, it's got such floral fragrance, but then it's got those herbs and spices in there as well, which I really, I'm really enjoying, I have to say.
Again, looking at a cooler climate area and using these varieties that would, of course, they make a great warmer climate style wine as well. But we're in a cooler climate, and I always say with these grapes that you don't have the luxury of fruit sweetness to cover everything, and fruit sweetness will also just cover everything and embolden the wine and just make it a much bigger wine. And what I find is that you're able to enjoy these other little nuances again, the herbaceousness, the French or the Provençal would call it garrigue, the herbs that you get in the area. And for us, it's the fynbos that you get around it. For us, fynbos is garrigue. It's having that slight little bit of herbaceousness that you don't really know what you can find until you've been here, going through the fynbos, rubbing your hands through it and smelling it, and you start to get a few of those smells as well. And I think these varieties really express it well.
Yeah, and it's.
Sorry, Jo. We come back a few times tonight to how we got here through Pinot, but again, Pinot will never really become a mainstream grape for the Cape because it needs to be reserved for the cooler areas. But being able to work with Syrah, which is widely planted through the Cape, and you sort of people say, I know Cape Syrahs very well, Scotland or Robertson or Stellenbosch, but this is different. And said, well, this is cool climate. So it really does underline once again what we experience in our climate in a bit of a broader sense than for what we see from Pinot. And it's lovely to be able to have a wine that does it for us. It really still brings home a little bit. We're not trying the whole time to carry across where we are, but we love our wines to express where we are. And this blend really does say it sometimes a little bit better than Pinot because there's a broader reference that can be used with this.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to have seen that vineyard to see where this wine comes from. You can start to rationalize that in your mind. Yeah, delicious. Now, Anna, I'm very conscious of time. Do you have some? I've been seeing lots of things coming up on the chat, but not really had much chance to properly read them. Have you got some specific questions you'd like to put to the guys?
Yeah, so we've had quite a few, and I must apologise. I don't think we'll be able to get through all of them this evening. But just on this wine, Keith Cooper has asked what the proportions are of each of the varietals.
For this vintage, we're looking at 2019. The Syrah is roughly anywhere between 75 to 80%. I think it's probably more 75 for this vintage. Grenache is about, I think, just under 20%, and there's just a tiny bit of Mourvedre, about 5% on. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Mark's also asked on this wine, does it replace the Granum?
No, Granum itself is a different expression from this vineyard. yeah, we've spent a lot of the last 15 years in making the wines from the vineyards, kind of showing the nuances of soil, but they've always been separate blocks and different soils and different vineyards, whereas Granum is one section of the Full Stop Rock vineyard, and it's not a separate block on its own, but it's one corner. So, and it was where this exceptionally rocky soil was at its shallowest, allowing the vines to see the clay underneath it and giving it a very different texture, a very different, I kind of say it's Gordy's prerogative in life to make things complicated. If there's anything he sees different in the vineyard, it goes into a tank on its own. So the Granum was very early on within the Full Stop Rock vineyard, showing such different signals. It was ripening later, it was budding later, and just had a very, different texture and density to it, an expression, darker fruit. So Granum is a little sort of little brother in the corner of this vineyard. So it doesn't replace it at all. No, it's they live happily, as I like to think, alongside each other.
And I think from memory, the wine that you bottled for us under a Liberator label, the God's Own Country, was from that part of the vineyard. So if members are interested, they could actually try that wine by comparison. To me, I'm lucky enough to have it.
That's exactly it.
It's a smoother. It's velvety. It doesn't have quite the same fragrance or energy, but it's a really deliciously smooth drink. But yeah, the two are quite different. I can see how they, how you would have wanted to. They're not even the same vintage, I don't think, but how you would have wanted to separate those and see how they would develop differently in the cellar.
Yeah, and the vineyard itself, that part of the vineyard just shows itself, and it's lovely. It's amazing to see. It does make a challenge on the winemaking though. It's another little separate component, but it was amazing to see one block and this corner where again the clay, that granitic clay, had come in underneath that sandstone rock and just shown a completely different wine. And so in working with yourselves and paying homage to our grandfather and where my father grew up, we grew up in a household having a lot of Yorkshire pud and chip butties. So God's Own Country, we were told, was the greatest place on earth besides South Africa.
I've put a link in for members as well, and brilliantly, Jo, that was going to be my final question. So I do appreciate that very much. I do just have one more small point. We always have members who are desperate to travel. And obviously, Jo and I, having been lucky enough to be there together, I have to say, I think your restaurant had just been built from memory.
It's thankfully it's going now. It's been very fortunate to survive well through lockdowns and COVIDs and stuff like that. So yeah, that's the view from the restaurant. And we, as anyone I think in the world like now, we would love to have people come back out. We've actually been very rewarded even in this winter to see how many foreign visitors we've had and tourists. But there is lots to do. We're only an hour and a half outside of Cape Town. We're sort of 10 minutes drive from the town of Hermanus, right by the sea, and there is wine tasting, there are views, there are snacks, and there is a table with a plate of food and a glass of wine or a bottle of wine, whichever you wish.
Fantastic. And yeah, highly recommended. I absolutely agree with Anna. It's a stunning spot. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you, and I think I can let members know as well that Bevan, aren't we seeing you in September? You're coming over to our tasting in September, I believe. Yeah,
very much so. Actually, we're both in London in September. Woody is doing his Cape Winemakers Guild duties, and I am with you guys and looking forward to it. It's like many things at this time of life, we haven't done it for a while. So looking forward to it. It's actually going to be wonderful to try and get back into the saddle.
It's going to be great to see you. And hopefully some of the people that have joined us this evening won't be a million miles away and we're just doing London, I'm afraid. Apologies to anyone that can't get into London. But we've got a really nice group of guys coming over as well with Bevan. So do come and see us. It's the 13th of September in London. Details on the tastings and events set page on the website. So thank you very much. Please pass on our thanks to your families for taking you away from them this evening. And cheers. I'm going to finish with a lovely sip of red.
Cheers. Cheers, Jo. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna. Thank you to everyone for this. All sounds wonderful, but it can't be done without support. So we really do appreciate it. Thank you very much, for sure.
Cheers, guys. And thank you, Anna and Mahesh in the background.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.